Hello, my name is Helene Lambert and I'm the director of the Peter McMullin Centre on Statelessness. And I begin with acknowledging that we meet today on the unceded land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Behrouz, it is an honor to have you with us today. Behrouz would be most known to us as a former detainee on Manus Island from 2013 to 2019, when he traveled to New Zealand on a one-month visa to speak at an event in Christchurch and claimed asylum. He was granted refugee status in New Zealand in 2020. But Behrouz is first and foremost a writer and a journalist. As a writer, his most significant work are two books, which are both quite different, I hear. No Friend But the Mountains, which is a literary work on Manus prison, which won the Victorian Prize for Literature and the Victorian Premier's Prize for Non-Fiction in 2019. His second book, Freedom, Only Freedom, is a collection of academic writings. And I hear he's currently working on a third book. Behrouz grew up in a country at war, in Kurdistan, in Western Iran. So in a deeply political context, where contestation and resistance was part of daily life. He studied political science in Tehran and started a career as a journalist, writing, amongst other things, on the survival of Kurdish culture. Behrouz maintains a profound connection to his homeland, the Kurdish city of Ilam, and strongly believes in the importance of his homeland retaining its Kurdish identity, language, and culture. Behrouz has very kindly agreed to share his perspectives on identity and its relationship with statelessness. This discussion will take the form of a 35-minute conversation with Radha Govil, our Deputy Director of the Centre on Statelessness, followed by a Q&A and a few minutes of poetry at the end. But before handing over to Radha, I wish to acknowledge the partnership with Dr. Claire Lofman from the School of Social and Political Sciences, with whom we have collaborated to organize 3 events with Behrouz over the last 2 weeks. The public event on art and friendship, the student masterclass on resistance and creative interventions in academia, and this third event on Kurdish identity, statelessness, and displacement. Behrouz and Radha, the floor is yours.
Just check see that the mic is working. Can everyone hear me adequately? No? It's not on. What about now if I speak at this level? Is that okay? Yeah, I'll try and maintain it.
Well.
Is that better? No.
I think now it's fixed.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Hooray! Thanks, Behrouz. So thanks very much, Helene. And I too would like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of this unceded land on which we're meeting today. I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And as we reflect today on the realities of statelessness, on lost identity perhaps, the condition of not having the nationality of any country, I think it's important to acknowledge the enduring connection of the Wurundjeri people to land, community and identity. A connection that has persisted despite generations of displacement, marginalisation and denial of rights. And in this we can recognise the deep parallels between the experience of statelessness and the impact of colonisation, which imposed foreign systems that have failed and continue to fail to recognise Indigenous sovereignty and identity. Welcome, Behrouz. feel like we've seen each other a little bit over the last couple of weeks, and I've been profoundly struck by many of the things that you've talked about. And many of the things that you've talked about in the last few events have touched on different aspects of your identity as a writer, as a journalist, a human rights activist, as a former prisoner and an asylum seeker. But one thing that perhaps doesn't surface as much, it did a little bit yesterday in the masterclass, but perhaps doesn't surface as much, is your identity as a person who is Kurdish. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your identity as a Kurdish person and the role that this has played in you leaving Iran and ending up detained on a small tropical island for 5 years.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. So identity, actually, it's been one of the main questions in my life. But my understanding of identity is that when you are living within your city or community, probably you don't think about it. When you leave and go to somewhere else, people ask you who you are, and you should answer that question. And for me, when I was like 17 or 18 years old, I was accepted by university in Tehran. So I moved to Tehran, and from there, for the first time in my life, people asked me who you are and where are you from. And I said, I'm Kurdish. And they said, which part of Kurdistan? I said, I come from Ilam. But that was quite interesting that people say, you are not Kurdish. Most of people answer me in that way. And that was quite like a shock. Also from like Kurdish students, many of them say that you are not Kurdish. And that was a huge shock. And so the reason why it's like that, because I come from a part of Kurdistan, which is the south part of Kurdistan in Iran. And so in that part of Kurdistan, Kurdistan, we call it Rojhelat in west of Iran, which Rojhelat means east. It means east of Kurdistan. What they did, the way they actually named the provinces in Iran is quite strategically. The central government divided Kurdistan in Iran. So they named a part of it. A part of Kurdistan has become a part of a province called Azerbaijan. A part of it, they call it Kermanshah, which is the biggest Kurdish city in Kurdistan in Iran is there. And they named a province Kurdistan. And my province is Ilam. So actually they divided Kurdistan to 4 provinces, and they named only one part of it as Kurdistan. And that has created like an image about Kurdistan. Where is Kurdistan? And so that's why on that time, I'm talking about like 20 years ago, people really didn't know when we say Kurdistan, where is Kurdistan? And that is quite has impacted on people's imagination or image about Kurdistan. And that was like a kind of trauma for me. And later I realized that is not only for me. This is a kind of trauma that only people from my province experience. Because they know themselves as a Kurdish, but when they leave Ilam, they go to other cities, they should prove or explain that they are Kurdish. And that was a very painful experience, and that's how I started to, and also a part of it, that part of Kurdistan I come from is not being very active to participate in the Kurdistan movement in the modern history. So that's why it's a very, I can't say probably the most assimilated part of Kurdistan. And our people are not very political as much as north of Kurdistan. And so that added, so I can say I grew up in the context of assimilation. And then, so I started to follow this question about the identity. And that's how I got involved in like Kurdistan political movement. And that was, now that I'm looking at the past, it's quite interesting that after 2 decades, I realized actually that moment, that particular moment, like 20 years ago, was a very historical moment because there were other people as well who faced this question, or it was like a transition of Kurdistan political movement in that part of Kurdistan. So after 2 decades, now I think through our activism and our work in Ilam, now without doubt, I think we don't face that question anymore because it seems that people already accepted that. So that is my experience with identity. But of course, later when I left Iran in 2013, I faced another identity crisis, which was when you become a refugee. And when you become a refugee, that means you have a title. And that means that title is strong enough. That title has a long history of dehumanization. That title actually has a long history of victimization. And in Manus Island, I was just a number. And they call us by number. And that became another like identity crisis, and I had to fight to actually how express myself and how actually imagine myself or introduce myself in this world, and how to challenge that image, the image of being a refugee. So still is going on. I think is like a, yeah, because now there is another crisis, which is people think that because I have a refugee background and I've written 2 books about refugees, so that's mean I should write about refugees in the rest of my life. Yeah, so that's why I've written a book which hopefully come out next year. It's a collection of short stories that absolutely they are not about refugees.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, Behrouz, talking about, you know, that sort of sense of pain and trauma that you experienced with this sort of the naming or not naming of parts of Kurdistan and the way that it's affected you. And again, in previous events this last couple of weeks, you've talked a lot about how you've internalized, or how you can't help but internalize some of that. And then again, that sort of being reinforced through your experience on Manus Island. And it struck me, you know, it's no surprise perhaps that your book is called No Friend But the Mountains, which I understand is a Kurdish proverb, or comes from a Kurdish proverb, and in a way sums up this sense of the way in which Kurdish identity, or your identity perhaps, is bound up with this feeling of exclusion, perhaps a little bit of loneliness. And these are very common traits that you hear about when you talk with people who are from stateless communities as well, that sense of sort of abandonment. And so I'm just wondering, you know, you've talked a little bit about Kurdistan and Kurdish identity in Iran, but I'm wondering if, for the benefit of all of us, you could give us a bit of a broader history of Kurdistan and where this kind of proverb that comes from the Kurdish language really sort of seems to resonate across that whole idea of Kurdistan. So could you give us a bit of a background history of Kurdistan and why Kurdish identity has been so closely linked with ideas of statelessness?
Yeah, I think I should just give like an image about Kurdistan. It's quite interesting. I visited Europe 3-4 times. And people in Europe, when you say I'm Kurdish, most of them know about Kurdistan. But in this part of the world, it's so, in New Zealand, in my daily life, I should explain all the time. And so people are not very aware of Kurdistan, where is Kurdistan. So that is quite different with Europe. Kurdistan is a nation, Kurdish nation, with at least 30 million population. Some Kurds believe we are 60 million, but I don't think we are 60 million. I think at least 30 million. So we can say 30 to 40 million people, which is divided between 4 countries: Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. But throughout the history, of course, before the concept of nation state, that this world has established on base of this concept and this structure, of course, Kurdistan was had autonomy, or there were different governments. So that is before the modern time we are talking about. But the main challenge has started in the modern time, during the concept of nation state, and that the main challenge that has been going on was mostly in the First World War, when the Ottoman Empire was fighting against Western countries like France, Britain, and all of these countries. So what they did, they approached the ethnic minorities or nations in the region. They said, if you help us in the war, so when we win the war, so you will establish your own state. And the result was the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and they, in an agreement it called Sykes and Picot, they actually established many countries like Iraq, Syria, Jordan, all of these countries in that region that they were not exist, they were a part of Ottoman, except Kurds. So that's how we been surrounded by 4 countries, that each country took control of a part of Kurdistan. So, and it's quite interesting that Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, of course, they have political battles. They are very disagreeing in many issues. But when it's come to Kurds, they are extremely united. And because we are surrounded by 4 countries. So that's how this actually has impact on our people, and we experience genocide, all of these, and fights, or it's still going on. But in Iraqi side, we achieved a federalism system, which is a part of the constitution. That United States was, of course, the main force to do that, because they invaded Iraq, and they had a big role to write the constitution. I think the constitution was written in 2005. So that's why that part of Kurdistan in Iraq, we had our own state, but as a part of Iraq, but like a federalism system. In Syrian side, during the civil war, the Kurdish forces has established a kind of autonomy, which is a very radical version of governing, to give space to women in the leadership in the community, and also on based of has ecological perspective. But that part of Kurdistan it's been under threat. So ISIS attacked there, and Kurdish people actually forces had the main role to defeat ISIS, and now is under threat. So we don't know what will happen. Might we? So still Syria, like internal, not conversation, but the battle is going on. So, but in Turkey and Iran, the situation is different. So in Iranian side, I think the worst part is in Iranian side. So still is going on. We achieved nothing. The language, Kurdish language is forbidden. So when I say forbidden, the Persian people say, no, your language is not forbidden. The language is forbidden when you don't let that language to be in the education system. When you don't let that language to be in the public platform, in official platform, to be a language of media, that people learn this language in the school, their own language, to read with this language. So of course that is forbidden. So, and also, so it's a very long history now. So that is the general image about history of Kurdistan. But refer to that title, Northern Bottom Mountains, is exactly related to history of Kurdistan in modern time. That we've been working or helping or being a big part of big wars in the modern history, and then the superpowers left us behind. So in the First World War, that happened. Even the recent case was with the in Syria, that Kurdish people forces had a big role to defeat ISIS. They were like united with the mostly united state, and then Trump withdrew some of their forces, and it's possible that's happen again. But regarding Northern Bottom Mountains, some Kurdish scholars or activists are not happy with this title because they say we should actually don't internalize or accept this title and be positive and try to, but that is the reality, you know. So far it's been a reality. And so I just used that title for the book. I can't explain why I used that, and I was not sure to use it. But my perspective towards Kurdistan is not only about Kurdistan. Is I believe that there is we should work towards to create a link with other ethnic minorities, other minorities all around the world, all of these movements to work. And refugees are a part of it, you know. Refugees are people who are marginalized. So that's why, because I believe it's like an intersectional context, especially in Manus, because Manus was established just generally in Australian border politics, established on colonialism mentality, because in fact they invaded those islands and used it as a place to torture people. So that's how, of course, it's linked with colonialism. So that's why I used that title. Yeah. Still, I'm not sure that that was a good idea or not. Yeah.
I think, it's interesting. I think one of the areas that we talk about, there's so many areas in the sort of broad scope of statelessness studies, as we call it, that remain unexplored. And one of the things that some of us who've worked in this area for a while keep commenting on is there's very little work that's done at the intersection of statelessness and mental health, and the impact of particularly intergenerational or long-term statelessness on the collective mental health of communities and of children. And I think, you know, maybe it's no mistake that you've taken something about how a nation state feels and internalized it to speak about how you feel in the context of the title of this book. I think it's something to, reflect on. I think it's an interesting thing. But just to clarify, you are not stateless.
I think stateless is like a concept. It's quite challenging in many ways because so there is like a legal definition about the stateless,
Yeah.
which is referred to people who don't have nationality.
Yeah.
So no one recognizes them as a citizen, and but of course I do have nationality. So in that context, I'm not stateless. And there are many people in Kurdistan that I think we should talk about them. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk about those people. That there are like a large number of Kurdish people are stateless. That means they don't have nationality, and those people are mostly like Faili Kurds, and it's very painful to become a stateless on your land. That is I think is very thing. So, but of course, stateless has like a legal definition, and which is like a term that is used mostly in United Nations documents or on those platforms. And also in Australia immigration system, they know this very well because many of these Kurds came to Australia. So that is the legal term, but generally we can use this term for like a nation who doesn't have a state as well. And of course, Kurdish people are stateless because we don't have the state. But some people are not happy with that because they feel it's a kind of like victimize them, or they feel they are victimized under this term. So that is quite challenging, but I myself, I don't have a problem with this title, and that is the reality, When something is a reality, I think
Call it that.
yeah, that's why. But I know that probably some people say that, like Palestinian people, probably some of them are not happy with this because they say we are in our land and
Yes.
we have a state, or it's just so. I just leave it with your department to.
We'll sort it all out. My goodness.
Yeah.
No, I think I think those are really astute observations, and particularly, making that connection with other complex situations of statelessness, like Palestine, like Western Sahara.
Like
They're not-
Rohingya people.
The Rohingya people, but I think that these examples are, they are in their own context. They have different histories. Some histories are connected, but some of them have different histories. But there is this kind of connection in the complexity of, this idea of de jure stateless people who are not recognised by a state under the operation of its law, the very technical legal definition, and a broader understanding of statelessness, as you've described. And I think earlier on when we were speaking, you said something about, there's sort of this kind of recognition of these struggles, or the recognition of this similarity in experience. And I was wondering if you could actually talk a little bit more about whether there is sort of tangible solidarity between the stateless Kurdish community, stateless Palestinians, stateless Western Saharans. What form does that take, and where do you see those connections existing, and what do you see as the kind of possibility in that?
I think that is just my perspective, actually. My work has been based off creating a connection between not only stateless people or ethnic minorities or stateless nations, even within the society, between like marginalized groups like LGBTQ people, like in Australia, indigenous people. So if we create that connection, be able to create that connection and create a culture of solidarity, actually that means we empower each other. And that means we understand each other, we recognize each other, and we have a shared experience as well. So we can have a mutual understanding to fight. But in the reality, that's is not work all the time.
No.
Because, you know, for example, in the case of Palestine, so that is, when we look at it from the Western perspective, from this part, of course, genocide happened there, and we should strongly stand to condemn that, and we've been doing that. But in the Middle East is complicated when it comes to courts. For example, and you know, between Palestine and Kurdistan, there is a long history of actually like solidarity. Has a very long history of solidarity, but recently has been quite challenging in some ways. For example, in the referendum of Kurdistan, I think it was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I exactly don't remember which year it was. So it was a referendum in Kurdistan in Iraq for gaining independence. And more than 92, around 93% of people in Kurdistan in Iraq, they voted yes. So they for getting independent. So what's happened on that time, if we look at like Palestinian groups, no one on this earth supported that referendum except Israel. So if you go and Google on like a Wikipedia, just read the like a referendum in Kurdistan, and the Palestinian groups like Hamas and others, they release a statement and they condemn it with Iran, Iraq, Syria, Spain, China, any country on this earth that has like an ethnic minority, they feel threatened and they condemn it. For example, Australia say that, it's not the right time, so they condemn it. So I mean, in the reality, on the ground, in the like a politically, sometimes the real politic actually, but what I say generally when I say to create that solidarity and we solidarity culture activism or create that link, I think that can be a voice of people, you know, and that can be a it's quite interesting. Like on Twitter, some people say that some Kurdish activists, why should we support Palestine because they didn't support us? But people say that even they don't support us, we should support Palestine and stay with solidarity with them because a genocide happened there. So that is the principle. So I mean, this culture, creating this solidarity culture, has a potential to actually has an impact in particular moments, you know. And I think in Kurdistan, what I know that always Kurds, you know, like there is a culture to stand with Palestinians. But on the ground, in the reality, sometimes that become like, for example, like Kurds in Syria now. So they are under threat by Turkey, and in other side, Israel sent some signals to. So I mean, it's very complicated on the ground. But what I am talking about as like a civil society, because we are not politicians. Civil society in academia, in activism, in cultural solidarity is so important. And so always, all of my works that I've been writing is stand in this like intersectional context. Like, for example, I work with a group of Aboriginal artists to make a play about Indigenous kids in custody. And in that play, actually, we used some Kurdish, because the play was a musical theater, a play. We used some Kurdish musical elements and also Palestinian elements. So we put everyone together to create that like connection. Like another thing, for example, a journal that we published, we put like Indigenous writers in Australia alongside refugees, and you know, so this kind of works that always has been like the context of my work. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you very much. And I think, I mean, not got a lot of time, and I do want to give the opportunity to everyone who's come today to ask you some questions, but just, you know, so much of what we talk about when we talk about statelessness boils down to this sense of belonging. And I was wondering if you could offer a personal reflection on what your sense of belonging is and where you feel at the moment you belong.
As a quite sense of belonging, I think as a refugee, or is like a kind of existential crisis, which sometimes I like it because it's meaningful, because it can give you like a unique perspective to understand the world, to understand the politics, to understand life is unique, you know. And when I think about it, for example, in Manus Island, I was writing constantly. I was writing, and I was just in that tiny island, and I was watching Australia. So when you are watching Australia from a tiny island for years, and you are obsessed with that, because you have to be obsessed because they detain you, and you are just thinking that to find a way to impact. Of course, that should be unique. I don't say it's perfect or but it's unique.
Yes.
You know, not only me, I mean, just generally, you know. And another thing is with just generally the marginalized people or minorities, we experience the invisibility, we experience the dark side of the system, we experience the dark side of, or the violent, for example, in this country. So when we experience the violence, so that means that we think about it, how to fight, how to challenge it, how to create some space, how to create change. And that's why I think that creates a kind of like a resistance knowledge. And that's is really important. But when you are like in a safe position in this country, of course you don't experience that dark side. So that's why I think it's really important this. And you know, in my case, for example, always I say that in Manus Island, the way I challenge Australia as a system, it was a very Kurdish way, because, and sometimes I think that if I was not Kurdish, that could be a different story. Why? Because we Kurds, we created our own resistance knowledge, created our own political culture, and it can be very radical, which is radical in Kurdistan, like revolutionary ideas. of course, I've been impacted by that culture. We lived in that culture. So when I came to Australia, they sent me to Manus Island, and it was clear for me to see the colonialism context, and that's how I just borrowed that culture in Kurdistan, and I reproduce it against this system here. So that's why, and of course, a big part of it was the knowledge that created by indigenous people in this country that inspired me, that I rely on that knowledge, I rely on that culture, and feel empowered that probably I'm the last person in this country is facing this violence. But there is a long history of violence that people, especially indigenous people, have been fighting against that. So that's why I felt, at least, I felt empowered to fight, because I knew there are people in Australia who can hear or understand what I'm writing about or talking about. So that's why, yeah.
Thanks, Behrouz. I think it's that idea that you carry your identity. No matter what the territory is, you carry these, you carry this history, you carry this identity. You talk about how this Kurdishness, Kurdish approach to things is something that you were able to translate into your resistance in the Manus Island context. So I think that's a lot to reflect on. I would love to talk to you all afternoon, but we don't have a lot of time, and I think there might be people here who would like to ask questions. I think we might have some mics. So maybe what I'll do is I'll take 2 or 3 questions, and then maybe, Behrouz, you could answer them, and if we have time, we can do a second round.
Yeah.
Is that okay? A gentleman over here, and then I think there's someone down there. If you could just perhaps say your name.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My name is Muhammad Kamal. I'm also Kurdish. Thank you very much for the beautiful presentation. I don't have a question, but I want to clarify one point, the relationship between the Kurds and the Palestinians. Because I am aware that the Kurdish leader of Iraq, Jalal Talabani, who became the president of Iraq later, was traveling on Palestinian passport. So there has been historically a very good relationship between Kurdish political parties and Palestinian secular political parties, not Islamic political parties. Unfortunately, Islamic political parties in the world are politically hypocritic. And for example, they support the establishment of a state in Bosnia, a state in Islamic state in Chechnya, an Islamic state in Myanmar. But when it comes to the Kurds, they stand against it. There's no possibility for a Kurdish state by Hamas or a Jihad al-Islami. And that's the point. So the relationship between Kurds and the Palestinians on the secular level is wonderful. And I'd like to mention another thing, the relationship between the Kurds and another ethnic community without a state in North Africa, the Amazigh people, is very good. And every year, many leaders of Amazigh movement, they are fighting for independence, they go to the Kurdish region of Iraq because they have their own autonomous region. And they have their own representative over there. Even there is an embassy of the Palestinians opened in Erbil, which is the capital of the Kurdish region of Iraq. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did you want to go ahead?
Hello. I'm دفحة بإنجليزي سؤالكم چون I don't know how to say in Kurdish. My question is very complicated but quick to ask. Is the Kurd an indigenous subject? So I'm thinking about a lot of the decolonial literature is often about the conquest of the Americas, invasion, genocide over there, beginning 1492 onwards. as that being the period of modernity. But I feel like there's a gap in the theorization of the Middle East, and at what point did Kurdish identity form in relationship with modernity and colonialism?
Yeah, I think that is a very, very interesting question. And I myself have been dealing with that. I identify myself as an indigenous, and definitely we are indigenous. But when it comes to the context of Kurdistan, when we use the term indigenous, my people are not happy with that, because the term indigenous, when it translated to the languages in that context in Middle East, the word that they replaced with indigenous has a long history of like victimization. So people feel that they are victimized under that concept, or people feel that they are undermined to be just a tribe, which tribe again in that context,
sort of more
in
primitive,
Middle East, yeah,
ideas.
primitive, all of this. So that's why I think I think that we should use the word indigenous without translators. Yeah, we don't have to translate it. Because if we translate it, the words that already exist in Farsi, in Kurdish, in Arab, all of that, those words has a like a negative context, or a kind of like undermining the nation or the identity. So that's why I think we should work to introduce this concept more, you know. And also people are not happy with the word minority, because people think that minorities mean that like we don't have a we are not a nation, we are just a minority, or people are not happy with the word ethnic minority. But all of this, I think, has a, like a definition, you know. Minorities not mean that you are less. Minorities mean your relation with power structure. So it's not about your population. If, you know, when you don't have power, you are minority. So all of this concept, I think, in the in the literature or in the like political language in that region, I think we should approach them. Some of the words we should reclaim them again, and all of this, I think, is like a conversation in the political context in Kurdistan. So that's why, but I myself strongly, I identify myself as indigenous, and we are indigenous. Yeah, because we've been living on that land for 1,000 years. So we are indigenous of that land.
Probably have time for a couple more questions if anyone wanted to ask. There's one here. Go ahead.
Thank you, Behrouz. This was so eye-opening. I'm from Iran and very informative, so much to learn still. I've picked up a lot of good lessons from the way you spoke. You presented all sides of conversation. You said, this is what I think, but then there's some people who say that. And I picked that up as a really good lesson as a researcher and in academia. What are some of the other insights, advices you have to the research, to the academia community when investigating and presenting and standing up for justice and truth? That's personally a really good takeaway for myself. But how can we support and be active in searching for truth and presenting and bringing it to attention of others around all sorts of issues that happen out there, particularly on, you've touched on refugee. I came here as a refugee as well, and I relate so much to what you've spoken about.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, my approach, I studied geopolitics in the university, but my approach to politics or international relation is a cultural approach. So I always try to, and that's how I am, because I write, I know myself, in end of the day, I know myself as an artist and a writer. So that's how my approach to even politics is a cultural approach. It's mostly through stories, listen to stories, try to understand people, you know. So that is my approach, and I don't like to be completely political person without having a cultural approach. Just politics, and politics is about power. So that is my approach all the time. But what we should do, you know, I mentioned before, it was we had an event long time ago, and someone asked me that I didn't know about Manu Sanan and Nauru, and I'm an Australian. I even haven't heard about it. What can we do? And I said that there are many books that we've written, not only me, other refugees, other people who work with refugees, there are films. So there is enough material that we educate ourselves, you know. But the main approach really to understand, like, generally marginalized people is to recognize the most radical knowledge that have produced come from marginalized like thinkers or intellectual or writers, because but it's invisible, which I call it writing history or making knowledge from below. Is not mainstream and is not going to be mainstream. It's invisible, but is important, you know. I think it's very, when I visited Europe, always, each country I visited, I just asked people about their minorities or marginalized people in that country, because they have a better understanding of it, you know. And that is something that I strongly believe that is true. If you talk about the indigenous person in this country, First Nation person in this country, the way they understand Australia, of course, is different to like a typical, I don't know if this word is correct or not, a typical white person in this country that is comfortable in many ways. So different. We are angry, but politically angry. We are politically angry, and if we don't be angry, there is something wrong. You know, we are politically angry, and we should try to understand why we are angry, because we experience violence, we experience discrimination. So, of course, in Tehran, in Iran, if you look at Iran, I think that most of the knowledge that in the mainstream, in the media, or is produced is just through the lens of Tehran. Cinema is in Tehran. History of cinema in Iran is happening in Tehran, represent Tehran, or is from the perspective of Tehran about other part of Iran. History is like that as well. Art, culture, literature. So just leave Tehran and go see other places. And I know that in Iran, when the tourists who go and visit Iran, the way they guide them, the way they show the places, the cities, is a way they don't go and see Kurdistan. They don't go and see Baluchistan. Those places, they say it's dangerous. That's how they, actually, many people I know, they visit Iran, but they never visit Kurdistan. So this is the how the system works, you know, and but it's like a long battle, and also it takes so much energy to educate people, you know. People should go and educate themselves. There are enough materials out there about all of people with marginalized background. Yeah. Thank you.
I think probably getting close to the hour, so I'm going to actually invite Ufuk.
Thank you. Spasibo hamu van kuhatin. Thank you everyone who came here today, and gelek spas Behrouz, spasikum. As a Kurdish person, it means great deal to be here today, in the presence of friends and community. I'm part of a stateless legal clinic here at the uni, second year JD student, and I'm from Bakur, northern Kurdistan, and it's, I guess the context changes where we are. We are divided between state borders, and it makes it harder to come as just like one voice. We have so many different voices in every different country that we are. And I guess it's important to remember that as well, like when it comes to politics especially. Yeah, like I spent 24 years in Turkey, and we've been called Mountain Turks, like let alone recognizing the Kurds, like we were just like called Mountain Turks, which I guess, can't be angry. Like, like mountains are very important in our culture, as Behrouz said. I mean, I hope we can carry this energy forward, and knowing that every song, every story, and every connection keeps our culture and cause alive. And I just wanted to end with a poem by Bejan Matur. She's also from Bakur, from my hometown. Funny enough, she was a lawyer and just become a poet. So, so here it goes. If this is a lament, they speak of a land that never was, a non-existing tongue. There is no utterance, no words. If we are put on earth to understand each other, who can make sense of death, explain how the mountains stole breath, or translate the darkness that has fallen? Who can say that burgeons in a child's dream, flapping out of an ancient tale? Birds' wings bear down on me, and skins akin to stone. As the old woman used to say, when the darkness falls beyond the mountains, the people I remember look to me in pain. My words are elegy. If this is a lament, we haven't even begun to cry. Thank you. Thanks everyone.